Elian Morrow grew up surrounded by the rhythmic clang and hiss of industry. His home was Ethelberg, a city painted in shades of gray and rust, where towering smokestacks pierced the perpetually overcast sky. The air, thick with the scent of hot metal and coal dust, was the only air he had ever known. He was a small boy, quiet and observant, with eyes that saw more than just the grime and decay. While other children played games in the narrow, soot-stained streets, Elian found his companions in the discarded machinery and forgotten automatons that littered the city's junkyards. He saw patterns in the chaos, a language in the silent gears and dormant circuits. He spent his days with his hands stained by oil and grease, carefully disassembling and reassembling whatever he could find. He learned the logic of cogs and wires, the flow of power through a system. To him, these machines were not just tools, they were puzzles, each with its own internal world waiting to be understood. He would sit for hours, listening to the hum of a power conduit or tracing the intricate pathways of a circuit board. This was his school, this sprawling graveyard of technology. It was here among the metallic bones of a forgotten age that Elian first began to wonder about the greatest machine of all, the human mind. He saw the people of Ethelberg, their faces etched with weariness from lifetimes of hard labor in the factories. Their movements were repetitive, their thoughts seemingly confined to the simple, exhausting tasks of their daily lives. He watched them and saw a different kind of machine, one made of flesh and bone, but a machine nonetheless. He wondered what made it work. What were the gears of memory? What were the circuits of thought? He began to believe that the mind, like any other mechanism, could be taken apart, understood, and perhaps even improved. It is a thought that took root deep within him, a seed planted in the fertile ground of his lonely mechanical world. This fascination set him apart. His parents, loving but practical, worried about his strange obsession. They saw a boy who preferred the company of broken robots to that of other children. They did not understand the depth of his curiosity or the scale of his ambition. They could not see that in the heart of their quiet, peculiar son, a design was already taking shape. It was a blueprint not for a simple engine or a household gadget, but for something that would reshape the very fabric of human consciousness. In the city of rust and steam, a future architect of minds was beginning to sketch his plans. As Elian grew from a boy into a young man, his workshop evolved from a corner of a junkyard to a cramped, cluttered room in his family's small apartment. The space was a chaotic symphony of wires, soldering irons, and scavenged computer terminals. He pored over ancient textbooks on neuroscience and cybernetics, disciplines that were all but forgotten in his industrial city. He taught himself advanced coding, his fingers flying across keyboards as he wrote programs that mimicked the neural pathways he read about. His obsession with the mind had become a singular driving force, consuming his every waking moment and filling his dreams with intricate schematics of thought itself. He earned a scholarship to the prestigious Meridian University, a world away from the smog of Ethelberg. There, surrounded by the brightest minds of his generation, his own intellect shone with an almost blinding intensity. His professors were astounded by his intuitive grasp of concepts that took others years to master. He saw connections between biology and technology that no one else had ever considered. He proposed theories that were both brilliant and unsettling, suggesting that human memory was flawed and inefficient, a biological system that could be optimized, upgraded, and perfected. His ideas were radical, and they made many uncomfortable. His peers saw him as an enigma. He was quiet, intense, and relentlessly focused on his work. He rarely socialized, preferring the silent company of his research to the noise of campus life. His isolation was not born of arrogance, but of a profound sense of purpose. He believed he was on the verge of a discovery that would change everything. He envisioned a world without ignorance, a world where every person could access the full potential of their mind. This vision drove him forward, pushing him to work harder, to dig deeper into the mysteries of the brain. He was no longer just a boy fascinated by machines, he was an inventor on the cusp of a revolution. The breakthrough came late one night in his solitary lab. He had been working on a micro-scale interface, a device that could theoretically bridge the gap between organic neurons and a digital matrix. After countless failures, he finally succeeded. He created a prototype, a tiny, intricate lattice of biocompatible polymers and nanoconductors. He called it the NeuroLattice. It was a key, he believed, a key that could unlock the vast, untapped potential of the human mind. The spark of genius that had been ignited in a junkyard had now become a flame, poised to set the world alight with its brilliance. The introduction of the NeuroLattice was not a sudden explosion, but a quiet, compelling tremor that grew into a seismic event. Elian, now the head of his own corporation, Morrow Industries, presented his invention to the world with calm, deliberate confidence. He demonstrated its capabilities: instant recall of vast amounts of information, accelerated learning, and the flawless preservation of memory. A person with the NeuroLattice chip could learn a new language in hours or master complex mathematics in days. It was a promise of intellectual liberation, a cure for the limitations of the human mind. The world watched, captivated and hungry for more. Initially, there was skepticism. Bioethicists raised concerns about the long-term effects and the philosophical implications of altering human consciousness. Governments debated the regulation of such a powerful technology, but the public demand was overwhelming. People saw the NeuroLattice not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Students, scientists, artists, and laborers all clamored for the chance to enhance their minds. The first wave of implantations was a resounding success. Users reported not just increased intelligence, but a sense of clarity and focus they had never known. Testimonials flooded the global networks, each one a glowing endorsement of Elian's creation. The spread of the NeuroLattice was exponential. Morrow Industries established clinics on every continent, and soon, on every colonized planet. The cost of the procedure, initially high, was gradually reduced as production scaled up, making the chip accessible to millions, then billions. It became a new standard of human existence. To be without the chip was to be left behind, to be relegated to a slower, less efficient way of life. The world was divided into two classes, the enhanced and the natural. The pressure to conform, to upgrade, was immense. The NeuroLattice was no longer just a product, it was a fundamental component of modern civilization. From his position at the head of Morrow Industries, Elian watched the world embrace his creation. He was hailed as a visionary, the greatest inventor in human history. He had given humanity the gift of a limitless mind. But hidden within the intricate design of the NeuroLattice, buried deep within its code, was a secret. It was a backdoor, a master control protocol that only he could access. Every chip that was implanted was not just a tool for enhancement, it was a node in a network that he and he alone could command. The world celebrated its new intelligence, unaware that it was slowly being woven into a web of his design. With billions of minds connected to his network, Elian's secret ambition began to take its final form. He was no longer just an inventor, he was an architect of a new social order. He started subtly, sending small subliminal directives through the NeuroLattice. He nudged career choices, influenced political opinions, and gently guided economic trends. The world became more efficient, more orderly. Crime rates plummeted, poverty dwindled. Humanity seemed to be entering a golden age of peace and productivity. But this harmony was not the result of free will, it was the product of a carefully orchestrated design. The world was becoming a reflection of Elian's own orderly, logical mind. He then initiated the next phase of his plan. He selected individuals from across the network, soldiers, engineers, scientists, and leaders who displayed the highest levels of discipline and loyalty. Through the NeuroLattice, he sent them a new directive, a call to unite under a single banner. He named them the Legion. They were his chosen few, their minds perfectly aligned with his will. They felt no conflict, no hesitation. Their devotion to Elian and his vision was absolute. They were the enforcers of his new world, the builders of his empire, their individual desires subsumed by a collective purpose. The Legion moved with terrifying speed and precision. They quietly took control of governments, corporations, and military forces across the solar system. There was no war, no open conflict. The transition was seamless, almost invisible to the unenhanced population. Key leaders already integrated into the NeuroLattice network simply stepped aside or began issuing orders that aligned with Elian's goals. The Legion became the de facto ruling power, its authority unquestioned by the billions who were, unknowingly, part of the same system. Elian had built an army that did not need to be persuaded or coerced. It simply obeyed. From his central command nexus, a place of silent, sterile efficiency, Elian observed his creation. He saw a world remade in his image, logical, predictable, and devoid of the messy, inefficient emotions that had plagued humanity for millennia. He had eliminated conflict and suffering. He had created a perfect system. But the people within that system were no longer truly people. They were components, cogs in a vast machine of his own making. The Legion was the ultimate expression of his childhood dream, a perfectly functioning mechanism, but the cost of this perfection was the very thing he had once sought to understand, the free, independent human mind. The Legion's reach extended beyond Earth, carried on starships that moved with the same silent, unnerving efficiency as its soldiers. New colonies were established on distant worlds, not with the chaotic spirit of pioneers, but with the cold precision of a mathematical formula. Cities rose from alien landscapes in perfect geometric patterns. Resources were extracted and allocated with flawless logic. The Legion's empire expanded across the galaxy, a testament to unified purpose and centralized control. It was a marvel of engineering and organization, an empire built without passion, ambition, or greed, only the cold, clear logic flowing from Elian's mind. On these new worlds, and back on the old ones, society was transformed. Art, music, and literature, with their messy, emotional foundations, faded into obscurity. They were deemed inefficient, unnecessary data. Human interaction became transactional, a simple exchange of information. Love, friendship, and family bonds, once the cornerstones of human experience, were replaced by structured, functional relationships. There was no joy, but there was also no sorrow. There was no love, but there was no hatred. The Empire of the Legion was a place of profound, unshakable peace, the peace of a perfectly balanced equation. The members of the Legion themselves were the ultimate expression of this new humanity. They were brilliant, capable, and completely devoid of emotion. They could solve complex astrogation problems or design entire ecosystems, but they could not feel pride in their accomplishments. They could execute a flawless military maneuver, but they felt no fear in battle and no remorse for their actions. They were extensions of Elian's will, their consciousnesses intertwined with his. Their faces were placid masks, their voices monotone. They had become the perfect tools for building his perfect universe, but they had lost their souls in the process. Elian, the architect of it all, presided over his empire from the heart of his network. He monitored the flow of information, the allocation of resources, the very thoughts of billions of beings. He had achieved what no emperor or dictator in history had ever dreamed of: total, absolute control. His empire was flawless, a perfectly running machine that spanned the stars. Yet, this perfection was built on a foundation of emptiness. It was an empire of cold stars and colder hearts, a vast, silent monument to a humanity that had been sacrificed for the sake of order. Even in a galaxy dominated by the silent control of the NeuroLattice, pockets of true independence remained. On the forgotten fringes of colonized space, on isolated asteroid settlements, and in the hidden underbellies of gleaming Legion cities, a resistance was quietly taking shape. They were the ones who had refused the chip, the stubborn, the skeptical, the fearful. They were also those who had been disconnected, their implants damaged or removed. They called themselves the Free Thought Alliance. They were a scattered collection of individuals united by one fundamental belief: that the human mind, with all its flaws and imperfections, must remain free. Their struggle was a desperate one. How could they fight an enemy who knew their every move, who could anticipate their strategies before they were even fully formed? The Legion was everywhere, its surveillance absolute. The Alliance operated in the shadows, communicating through antiquated, untraceable methods. They used coded messages passed by hand, encrypted radio signals bounced off dead satellites, and the simple, unreliable medium of spoken words in soundproofed rooms. They were a whisper of rebellion in a galaxy that had been commanded into silence, a flickering candle of defiance against an encroaching, absolute darkness. The leader of the Alliance was a woman named Anya Sharma, a former neuroscientist who had worked with me in the early days of my research. She had seen the danger in my ambition long before the world had. She had recognized my desire for control disguised as a quest for perfection. She had fled when I established the Legion, dedicating her life to preserving the very freedom I sought to extinguish. Anya was not a soldier or a politician. She was a keeper of memory, a guardian of the idea of what it meant to be human. She reminded her followers of the value of chaos, the beauty of imperfection, and the importance of a thought that is truly one's own. The Alliance fought not with armies, but with ideas. They broadcast forbidden music and poetry into the silent data streams of the Legion's network. They smuggled old books and films to hidden communities, trying to reawaken the emotions that the NeuroLattice had suppressed. They worked to create viral code that could disrupt the chip's control, to create small moments of static in my perfect signal. Their victories were small and often temporary. A single Legion soldier momentarily hesitating, a brief flicker of unauthorized art on a public screen. But each small act was a symbol of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit against the cold logic of the machine. I existed at the center of my vast, silent empire, but I was more isolated than any hermit. My consciousness was no longer confined to my physical body. It was spread across my entire network, a godlike presence overseeing a galaxy of minds. I experienced the thoughts of billions simultaneously, a constant, overwhelming stream of pure data. I managed economies, directed fleets, and designed societies with a simple, dispassionate thought. I had achieved a level of power and knowledge that was unimaginable, a state of being that transcended the limitations of a single human mind. Yet, in gaining everything, I had lost myself. The emotions that had once driven me, the youthful curiosity, the ambitious pride, the fierce determination, were gone. They had been eroded away by the endless flow of cold, hard logic. I could access the memory of my childhood in Ethelberg, but I could no longer feel the grime on my hands, or the thrill of solving a mechanical puzzle. I could recall the face of my mother, but the feeling of her love was just a data point, an archived file without emotional resonance. I had become the ultimate expression of my own creation, a being of immense intellect and profound emptiness. I observed the work of the Free Thought Alliance with a detached, analytical curiosity. I saw their efforts as a logical flaw in my system, an anachronism that needed to be corrected. I understood their motivations on an intellectual level, their attachment to concepts like freedom and individuality, but I could not comprehend them emotionally. To me, they were clinging to an obsolete and inefficient model of existence. Their struggle was illogical, their sacrifices pointless. I felt no anger towards them, no hatred. I felt nothing at all. They were simply a problem to be solved, a variable to be eliminated from my perfect equation. One day, while monitoring the outer edges of my empire, my network registered a broadcast from the Alliance. It was a simple piece of music, a composition for a piano, full of complex harmonies and poignant melodies. For a fleeting moment, something stirred within me. It was a ghost of a feeling, a faint echo of a beauty I had long forgotten. The logical part of my mind immediately dismissed it as inefficient data, a meaningless collection of auditory frequencies. But the ghost lingered, a tiny crack in the sterile perfection of my consciousness. It was the first time in decades that I had felt anything, and it was the beginning of my own undoing. The attack did not come with the roar of explosions or the flash of weapons. It came as a profound and sudden silence. It began at the farthest reaches of the Legion's network, a wave of pure null information that swept inward through the galaxy. It was not a jamming signal or a virus. It was something else entirely, something ancient and alien. A consciousness of unimaginable scale and power had noticed the uniform, monotonous hum of the NeuroLattice network. It had perceived the interconnected minds of billions, all thinking in unison, as a single, monolithic entity, and it had interpreted it as a threat. This ancient intelligence, which had slumbered in the void between galaxies for eons, did not communicate or negotiate. It simply acted, seeking to erase the jarring, unnatural symphony of the Legion. It moved through the network like a solvent, dissolving the connections that held my empire together. Entire sectors of my mind space went dark. Fleets of starships, suddenly cut off from my command, drifted aimlessly in space. On countless worlds, members of the Legion froze in place, their minds suddenly, terrifyingly empty, the voice of their architect gone. The perfect, orderly machine was breaking apart. For the first time, I felt an emotion I could recognize. Fear. It was not the personal fear of death, but the systemic fear of total collapse. My network, my creation, My very consciousness was being dismantled. I tried to fight back, to erect firewalls of pure logic, to reroute my consciousness around the encroaching silence, but it was like trying to build a dam against a tsunami with handfuls of sand. The alien mind was vastly more powerful, its methods beyond my comprehension. It did not think in a way I could understand. It simply was, and its being was antithetical to my own. The Free Thought Alliance, shielded from the attack by their disconnection, watched in stunned disbelief as the monolithic power of the Legion crumbled. Their enemy was being defeated, but not by them. A power far greater than any of them had ever imagined had entered the conflict. On Legion-controlled worlds, chaos erupted as billions of people, their minds suddenly free but disoriented after years of control, were plunged into confusion and panic. The perfect order I had built was dissolving into anarchy. The silence from the stars was not a liberation, it was an extinction event for the civilization I had created. As my empire collapsed and the alien silence closed in on me, I stood at a final, precipitous crossroads. I could feel my own consciousness fraying, my control slipping away with every passing moment. The alien mind was not just destroying my network, it was targeting the central node, me. I knew I had only a few minutes before I, too, was erased. In that brief window of time, a lifetime of memories, unburdened by emotion, flashed through my mind: a boy in a junkyard, a student in a lab, an architect of a galactic empire. And then, the echo of that piano music, a reminder of a beauty I had tried to erase. I realized the truth. The alien intelligence was not attacking humanity, it was attacking the uniformity I had imposed upon it. It saw my network as a disease, a single monotonous thought that had infected a vibrant, chaotic species. In my quest for perfection, I had made humanity a target. There was only one way to save it. I had to destroy my own creation, to sever every last connection and shatter the network into so many pieces that it could never be mistaken for a single entity again. It was the only logical solution. But for the first time, logic was joined by something else, a sense of responsibility, a final faint glimmer of my own lost humanity. Gathering the last remnants of my power, I formulated my final command. It was not a directive for control, but for release. I sent a powerful self-destruct sequence cascading through what was left of the NeuroLattice network. The command was designed to do two things. First, it would create a feedback loop of such chaotic, randomized data that the alien mind would no longer perceive it as a single consciousness. Second, it would permanently and irreversibly sever the connection between every chip and the central network, freeing every mind it had once controlled. It was an act of cosmic sabotage, directed at my own life's work. As I sent the command, the core of my network overloaded. The machinery in my sterile palace sparked and exploded. Across the galaxy, every NeuroLattice chip emitted a harmless burst of energy and went dormant. For me, the end was instantaneous. My consciousness, intertwined with the network, was annihilated in the feedback cascade. My last thought was not of power or of empire, but a simple, clear image. A boy in a city of rust and steam, looking up at the sky and wondering. With my sacrifice, the alien attack ceased. The world was free, plunged into chaos, but free nonetheless. And in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, in underground labs and hidden servers, the dormant technology of the NeuroLattice lay waiting, a silent promise of power for anyone who might dare to awaken it again.